The champagne glasses sparkled under the crystal chandeliers, and the sound of polite laughter filled the grand hall of the Metropolitan Opera House. It was another charity gala, another evening where the wealthy gathered to write checks and feel good about themselves. David Richardson stood near the bar, barely listening to the conversation around him. At 32, he had more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes. His tech company had gone public 5 years ago, and since then life had become a blur of the same faces, the same events, the same women who laughed too loud at his jokes and touched his arm just a little too long. He was bored. Desperately, utterly bored. The woman next to him was talking about her latest vacation to the Maldives, and David nodded at appropriate intervals while his mind wandered. He'd been to the Maldives twice. Once was enough. He'd bought the experience, photographed it, and moved on. That seemed to be his pattern with everything lately. Excusing himself, David wandered away from the main ballroom. The gala was in full swing, but he needed a break from the noise and the pretense. He walked down a marble corridor, his footsteps echoing in the quiet. That's when he heard it. Piano music. It wasn't the background classical music playing in the ballroom. This was different, raw, emotional. The kind of music that grabbed your chest and squeezed. David followed the sound like a man in a trance, pushing open a door that led to a smaller side room. There, at a gorgeous old Steinway piano, sat a young woman in a simple black server's uniform. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and she was completely absorbed in the music flowing from her fingers. She played with her eyes closed, swaying slightly as if the music was moving through her body. David stood frozen in the doorway. He'd been to countless concerts, owned a box at the symphony, and even dated a professional violinist once. But he'd never seen anyone play like this. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, filled with a longing that seemed to echo his own emptiness. When she finished the piece, her hands rested gently on the keys for a moment, as if saying goodbye to the notes still hanging in the air. David started clapping slowly, and the woman's eyes flew open. She jumped up from the piano bench, her face flushing with embarrassment. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, smoothing down her uniform. "I was just on my break. I didn't think anyone would hear." "Don't apologize," David said, walking into the room. "That was incredible. Where did you learn to play like that?" "Here and there," she said vaguely, moving away from the piano as if she'd been caught doing something wrong. I should get back to work. But David wasn't ready to let her go. Something about her playing had woken something in him. Some part of himself he'd forgotten existed. "Wait, what's your name?" "It doesn't matter," she said, but her tone was polite, not rude. "It matters to me." David flashed the smile that usually worked on everyone. "I'm David. I know who you are, Mr. Richardson." The woman picked up a tray from a side table. "Everyone here knows who you are." There was something in her voice, a slight edge that David couldn't quite place. It wasn't the usual fawning tone he was used to. If anything, she seemed unimpressed. "You're wasted serving champagne," David said, and he meant it as a compliment. "With talent like that, you should be on a stage somewhere. You should be the one people are paying to see." The woman's expression hardened slightly. "I'm perfectly fine where I am, thank you." David laughed, pulling out his wallet. It was a gesture so automatic he didn't even think about it. "Come on, everyone has a price. How much would it take for you to play for me? Private concerts at my place. I have a beautiful piano that no one ever plays. Name your number." "I'm not for sale, Mr. Richardson." "I'm not trying to buy you," David said, though even as the words left his mouth he realized that's exactly what he was trying to do. "I'm trying to hire you. There's a difference. Look, I'll be honest. I'll marry you if you play like that for me every day." He laughed at his own joke, the way he always did when he said something outrageous. It was a habit from years of closing deals and charming investors. Say something bold, laugh it off, watch people scramble to please you. But the woman didn't laugh. She didn't even smile. Instead, she looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. It wasn't anger exactly. It was something closer to disappointment. Like she'd expected better from him and was let down to discover he was exactly what she'd thought. "Your money doesn't interest me," she said quietly, "and neither does your proposal, joking or otherwise. Some things aren't for sale. Some things actually matter beyond a price tag." She picked up her tray and walked toward the door. David, who was used to people doing whatever he wanted, found himself speechless. Women didn't walk away from him. People didn't turn down his offers. No one had said no to him in years. Wait, he called out. At least tell me your name. She paused at the doorway, looking back at him over her shoulder. For a moment, David thought she might actually tell him, but then she just shook her head. It's better if you don't know, she said. Goodbye, Mr. Richardson. Enjoy the rest of your evening. And then she was gone, leaving David alone in the room with the piano and the fading echo of the most beautiful music he'd ever heard. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty doorway. Something had just happened, something important, but he couldn't quite grasp what it was. He felt embarrassed, which was unusual. He felt rejected, which was rare. But more than anything, he felt curious. Who was she? And why had his money, his charm, his everything not worked on her? David walked over to the piano and ran his fingers along the keys, but he didn't know how to play. He'd never needed to learn. If he wanted music, he bought concert tickets or downloaded songs. If he wanted art, he bought paintings. If he wanted anything, really, he just bought it. But apparently, some things couldn't be bought. The thought bothered him more than it should have. He went back to the gala, moving through the crowd with a distracted air. People tried to talk to him, but he barely heard them. His mind kept replaying the scene in that room, the way the woman had looked at him when he'd made his joke about marrying her. She'd looked at him like he was exactly the kind of man she'd expected him to be. Rich, arrogant, and empty. Someone who thought everything had a price tag, including people's dignity and talent. Was that really who he was? David left the gala early, ignoring the disappointed looks from the event organizers who'd been hoping he'd make a big donation announcement. He sat in the back of his car watching the city lights blur past the window. For the first time in years, David Richardson felt something other than boredom. He felt challenged, intrigued, and determined to find that woman again, whoever she was. He had no idea that she was exactly the kind of person he should avoid. He had no idea that their next meeting would change everything. And he definitely had no idea that his careless joke about marriage would come back to haunt him in ways he never imagined. All he knew was that somewhere in this city, there was a woman who played piano like an angel and looked at him like he was just another spoiled rich man who'd never worked for anything real in his life. And for reasons he couldn't explain, he needed to prove her wrong. David couldn't stop thinking about her. 3 days had passed since the gala, and the memory of that piano music haunted him like a song stuck in his head. He'd tried to focus on work, on the usual distractions, but nothing helped. Every quiet moment he heard those notes again. His assistant, Claire, knocked on his office door with his morning coffee. She'd worked for him for 6 years and knew his moods better than anyone. "You've been staring at that same email for 20 minutes, she observed, setting down the cup. "What's going on?" "I need you to find someone," David said, turning to face her. "A woman who was working at the Metropolitan Opera House Gala last Friday. Server staff, late 20s, dark hair, plays piano like a professional." Claire raised an eyebrow. "That's not much to go on. It's all I have. Contact the catering company they used. Someone must know who she is." "David," Claire said carefully, "you do realize how this sounds, right? Tracking down a woman who clearly wasn't interested?" "She was interested in the music," David said. "I just need to apologize properly." "I said something stupid." Claire sighed but made a note on her tablet. "I'll see what I can find." What David didn't know was that the woman he was looking for wasn't hard to find at all. Her name was Sophia Chen, and she was one of the most celebrated classical pianists of her generation. Her concerts sold out months in advance. Her last album had won international awards. She came from a family of musicians who'd built a music education empire worth hundreds of millions. But Sophia wasn't at that gala as herself. She was there working on a project that meant everything to her. A documentary about the disconnect between the wealthy and the people who served them. She wanted to show the world how the rich treated service workers when they thought no one important was watching. David Richardson had walked right into her lens. Sophia sat in her modest studio apartment, the one she kept separate from her family's estate, reviewing footage on her laptop. She'd worn a hidden camera and a button on her uniform that night. The video showed everything. David's condescending tone, his assumption that money could buy anything, that careless joke about marriage. "Perfect," muttered her producing partner, Trevor, watching over her shoulder. "This is exactly the kind of material we need." The casual arrogance of wealth. But Sophia felt uneasy watching the footage. Yes, David had been arrogant. Yes, his offer to essentially purchase her as his personal pianist was insulting. but there was something in his face when he'd listened to her play. A genuine emotion she hadn't expected to see. I don't know, Trevor. Maybe we should focus on people who are actually harmful, not just clueless. Clueless is harmful, Trevor argued. These people control everything and they see the rest of us as props in their lives. This documentary could actually make a difference. Sophia closed her laptop. I need to think about it. Over the next 2 weeks, Sophia attended 3 more high society events, always as service staff, always documenting. But she also started noticing David Richardson showing up at the same venues. He wasn't just attending, he was searching. Looking at every server's face, asking quiet questions. He was looking for her. At a corporate fundraiser in a downtown hotel, Sophia was serving appetizers when she heard a familiar voice behind her. Excuse me. She turned and there he was, David Richardson in an expensive suit looking at her with something like relief in his eyes. It's you, he said softly. Sophia kept her expression neutral, balancing her tray. Mr. Richardson, you remember me? He smiled and she noticed it was different from his smile at the gala. Less cocky, more uncertain. Look, I've been trying to find you. I wanted to apologize. What I said at the opera house, it was disrespectful. I treated you like a commodity and that was wrong. Apology accepted, Sophia said simply. Will that be all? No. David ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that seemed genuinely nervous. I meant what I said about your playing. You're extraordinarily talented. I just went about expressing it in the worst possible way. I appreciate that, Mr. Richardson, but I really need to get back to work. Wait, please. He pulled out his business card, writing something on the back. This is my private number. I'd like to hire you properly this time. As a piano teacher. I'll pay whatever your rate is. I want to learn to play and I want you to teach me. Sophia looked at the card, her mind racing. This was an opportunity. If she could get close to him, document his world from the inside, the documentary would be even more powerful. She could show not just how the wealthy treated service workers, but how they lived, how they thought, how disconnected they really were. $500 an hour, she said, testing him. And I choose where we meet. Those are my terms. David didn't even blink. Done. When can we start? Tomorrow. 6 p.m. She pulled out her own card, one she'd made specifically for this project with a fake name and contact information. This address. Don't be late. As she walked away, Sophia felt a mix of excitement and guilt. The documentary needed this, but something about the hopeful look on David's face made her uncomfortable in a way she hadn't expected. The next evening, David arrived at the address Sophia had given him. He'd expected a nice studio, maybe in a trendy neighborhood. Instead, he found himself at a community center in a working-class area he'd never visited before. The building was old but well-maintained, with a sign advertising free music classes for kids. Sophia was waiting inside, dressed in jeans and a simple sweater, her hair down around her shoulders. She looked different without the server's uniform. Younger, more relaxed. This is where we'll be meeting, she said, gesturing to an upright piano in a room with scuffed floors and folding chairs. Is that a problem? David looked around. It was about as far from his usual environment as possible. But he said, no problem at all. Good. Sit. Sophia pointed at the piano bench. For the next hour, David learned what it meant to be a beginner at something. Sophia was a patient but demanding teacher. She made him practice hand positions until his fingers ached. She corrected his posture 6 times. She didn't let him skip any steps just because he was rich or important. Money can't buy muscle memory, she told him when he tried to move ahead too quickly. Your hands need to learn through repetition just like everyone else who's ever played piano. David found himself actually enjoying it. Not because he was good, he was terrible, but because Sophia treated him like a regular student. She didn't laugh at his jokes unless they were actually funny. She didn't compliment him unless he earned it. She was the first person in years to treat him like he was just another person. You have potential, Sophia said at the end of the lesson, but you'll need to practice every day. At least an hour. I'll buy a piano tomorrow, David said. You don't own a piano? Sophia looked surprised. I have one. I've just never played it. It's more of a decoration. Sophia's expression darkened slightly, and David realized how that must sound. A piano is decoration while people at this community center scraped together funding for instruments for kids who actually wanted to learn. Next week, same time, Sophia said. packing up her sheet music. And David? Actually practice. Don't just throw money at this and expect results. As David left, he noticed Sophia helping an elderly janitor move some chairs. She knew his name, Carlos, and asked about his daughter who was studying nursing. It was such a small moment, but it stuck with David during his drive home. That night, for the first time in years, David sat at his decorative piano and actually tried to practice. His playing was clumsy and frustrating, but he kept going. He thought about Sophia's hands on the keys, the way she made music look effortless. He didn't know she was filming him earlier with a hidden camera in her bag. He didn't know the community center was chosen specifically to highlight his privilege. He didn't know that every word he said was being documented for a film meant to expose people exactly like him. And Sophia didn't know that she was about to learn something unexpected, that people could change. That wealth and arrogance weren't always permanent conditions. That the man she was filming might actually surprise her. But that discovery was still weeks away. For now, they were just a teacher and a student, circling each other carefully, both hiding secrets that would eventually collide in ways neither of them could predict. 4 weeks passed, and something unexpected was happening. David was changing, and Sophia couldn't deny it anymore. At first, she documented everything with a kind of detached satisfaction. David struggling with basic scales, David uncomfortable in the community center, David clearly out of his element among regular people. It was exactly what she needed for the documentary. But then things started shifting in ways she hadn't anticipated. David began arriving 30 minutes early to each lesson. The first time, Sophia thought it was a fluke. The second time, she realized he was helping Carlos, the janitor, set up chairs for the evening's children's choir practice. By the third week, David knew the names of half the staff at the community center. "You don't have to do that," Sophia said one evening, watching him arrange music stands. "I know," David replied, focused on getting the spacing right. "But Carlos mentioned his back has been bothering him. This is the least I can do." Sophia felt her carefully constructed narrative starting to crack. This wasn't the entitled billionaire she'd planned to expose. Or at least he wasn't just that anymore. During their 5th lesson, David's playing finally started to improve. His fingers found the right keys more naturally. The rhythm wasn't perfect, but it was there. Sophia found herself genuinely proud of his progress. "You've been practicing," she said, unable to hide a small smile. "Every morning before work," David admitted. "My assistant thinks I've lost my mind. She keeps asking why I'm suddenly interested in piano." "What did you tell her?" David's hand stilled on the keys. He looked at Sophia with an intensity that made her heart skip. "I told her I met someone who made me want to be better at something. Not better than other people, just better than I was." Sophia quickly looked down at her sheet music, pretending to find the next exercise. These moments were happening more often, moments where David said something genuine and vulnerable, and she had to remind herself why she was really there. "Let's work on this piece," she said, keeping her voice professional. But after the lesson, as they were packing up, David lingered. "Can I ask you something? Why do you teach here instead of some fancy music school? You're talented enough to teach anywhere." Sophia had prepared an answer for this. "I believe music should be accessible to everyone, not just people who can afford expensive lessons." "That's admirable." David looked around the worn community center. "This place could use some upgrades, though. The roof looks like it's seen better days, and I noticed the piano in the children's room is missing keys. We make do with what we have," Sophia said carefully. "What if someone wanted to help? Anonymous donation, no strings attached?" Sophia felt conflicted. This was exactly the kind of gesture that could help dozens of kids. But it would also complicate her documentary, muddy the narrative she was trying to build. "The center always accepts donations," she said finally. "Talk to the director, not me." The following week, the community center got a new roof, 3 refurbished pianos, and a fully stocked supply closet. David never mentioned it, but Carlos told Sophia who'd written the check. A check large enough to cover their operating costs for 2 years. "Your student is full of surprises," Carlos said, beaming. "Good man, that one." Sophia didn't know what to say. She went home that night and reviewed her footage, trying to salvage her original angle. But watching David now, seeing how he listened attentively to the kids performing their practice pieces, how he stayed late to hear a young girl's first recital, she couldn't reconcile him with the arrogant man from the opera house. Trevor noticed her hesitation during their weekly production meeting. "You're getting too close," he warned. "Remember why we're doing this?" "I remember," Sophia said. "But what if we're wrong about him?" "We're not wrong about the system," Trevor countered. "One rich guy learning to be decent doesn't change the fundamental inequality we're exposing." But Sophia kept thinking about it. That night she did something she hadn't done in weeks. She played piano for herself, not for filming, not for work. Just played, and realized the music felt different now, complicated by feelings she didn't want to acknowledge. During their 8th lesson, David opened up in a way he never had before. They were taking a break, drinking coffee from the community center's ancient machine. "Can I tell you something?" David asked quietly. "Something I haven't told anyone?" Sophia nodded, though part of her wanted to stop him. She knew her camera was recording from her bag across the room. "I've been thinking about my life lately, really thinking about it, and I realized I've been lonely for years. I'm surrounded by people all the time, but they're not really there for me. They're there for my money, my connections, what I can do for them." He stared into his coffee cup. "You're the first person in years who treats me like I have to actually earn something. Not my respect, not my friendship, just basic competence at playing piano." "David," Sophia started, feeling guilt twist in her stomach. "Let me finish," he said. "When I made that stupid joke about marrying you if you played for me, I was being the worst version of myself. I was treating you like an object, like something I could acquire. But these past few weeks learning from you, being here, it's made me realize how much of my life I've spent trying to buy meaning instead of creating it." Sophia felt tears prick her eyes. This was a good man sitting in front of her. Flawed, yes. He'd started from a place of privilege and arrogance, but he was genuinely trying to grow, to learn, to be better, and she was secretly filming him for a documentary meant to tear him down. "You're a good teacher," David continued, "but more than that, you're a good person. You don't compromise your values. You don't let money impress you. You see people as people, whether they're billionaires or janitors. I want to be more like that." "You're already becoming that," Sophia said softly, and she meant it. David smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "Thanks to you." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then David said, "There's a fundraiser next month for arts education. Would you come with me? Not as my teacher, just as someone I'd really like to spend time with outside of piano lessons." Sophia knew she should say no, knew that crossing that line would make everything infinitely more complicated. But looking at David's hopeful expression, she found herself saying yes. That night, Sophia made a decision. She called Trevor and told him she was shutting down the documentary project. He argued, tried to convince her otherwise, but Sophia was firm. "This isn't the story I thought it was," she told him, "and I can't keep lying to someone who's been nothing but honest with me." "You're making a mistake," Trevor said angrily before hanging up. Sophia sat alone in her apartment, looking at hours of footage on her laptop. She'd captured David's transformation, his genuine growth, but she'd also captured it through deception, and that didn't sit right with her anymore. She decided she would tell David everything at the fundraiser. She'd show him the footage, explain her original intentions, and let him decide what happened next. It would probably end their friendship, might even end badly. But it was the right thing to do. What Sophia didn't know was that Trevor wasn't ready to let the documentary go. He had copies of all the footage, including that first night at the Opera House, and he had plans of his own. Over the next 2 weeks, David and Sophia continued their lessons, but something had shifted between them. The conversations went longer. The silences felt comfortable instead of awkward. David started bringing Sophia coffee the way she liked it, and Sophia found herself looking forward to their sessions in a way that had nothing to do with teaching piano. One evening, as they walked through the neighborhood after a lesson, David stopped. "I need to tell you something." Sophia's heart raced. "What is it?" "I think I'm falling for you," David said simply. "I know that's probably not what you want to hear. I'm your student, and you probably think I'm still that arrogant guy from the gala. But being around you has changed me. You've changed me, and I wanted you to know." Sophia felt her carefully built walls crumbling. She wanted to tell him the truth right then, wanted to confess everything. But the words stuck in her throat. "David, there's something I need to tell you too," she started. But before she could continue, both their phones buzzed with notifications. Then again, and again. David pulled out his phone and Sophia watched his face go pale. "What is it?" she asked, though dread was already settling in her stomach. David turned his phone toward her. On the screen was a viral video, already shared thousands of times. The title read, "Billionaire proposes to server, I'll marry you if you play. The arrogance of wealth." It was footage from the opera house. Her footage, but edited to make David look as terrible as possible, with no context, no follow-up, no redemption. Just his worst moment, packaged for maximum outrage. And underneath, in the description, filmed secretly by pianist Sophia Chen for her upcoming documentary on wealth inequality. Sophia felt the world tilt. "David, I can explain." But David was already stepping away from her, his expression shifting from confusion to betrayal to something worse. Hurt. "You were filming me?" His voice was barely a whisper. "This whole time?" "It's not what you think," Sophia said desperately. "I stopped the project weeks ago. I wasn't going to air it. Trevor must have leaked it without my permission." "Trevor?" David's laugh was bitter. "There's a whole team? How many people have been watching me make a fool of myself?" "You're not a fool." "David, please listen." But David was already walking away toward his car waiting at the curb. "Everything you said about people using me, about not treating others like objects, you were doing the same thing. Worse, actually. At least the people who want my money are honest about it." "David, wait," Sophia called out, but he was gone. She stood alone on the sidewalk watching his car disappear, knowing she'd just lost something precious. Something real, and it was entirely her fault. The video went viral overnight. By morning, it had millions of views. The comments section was brutal, filled with people who thought they knew everything about David based on a 30-second clip. Sophia sat in her apartment, her phone buzzing constantly with messages from reporters, friends, and people she hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone wanted a comment. Everyone had an opinion. But the only person she wanted to talk to wasn't answering her calls. She'd tried reaching David a dozen times. Each call went straight to voicemail. Her texts remained unread. She'd even gone to his office building, but security wouldn't let her up. Claire, his assistant, had been kind but firm. "He doesn't want to see you." "Please respect that," Trevor called, sounding pleased with himself. "The response has been incredible. We should move forward with the full documentary while we have momentum." "You had no right to leak that footage," Sophia said, her voice cold. "I told you the project was over." "You're too close to see clearly," Trevor argued. "This is important work. We're exposing how the wealthy really think. You exposed one bad moment without any context. You made him look like a monster when he's actually a good person who made a mistake and learned from it." "Sophia, don't be naive. People like him don't really change. They just get better at hiding who they are." Sophia hung up. She knew Trevor was wrong because she'd witnessed David's transformation firsthand. But now the whole world would only see that one awful moment, frozen in time forever. She looked at her laptop, at the hours of footage she'd collected. Footage of David helping Carlos, David learning piano with genuine dedication, David writing checks to help the community center without wanting any recognition, David opening up about his loneliness and his desire to be better. Sophia made a decision. If Trevor wanted to tell a story, she'd tell the complete one. Meanwhile, David sat in his penthouse staring at the piano he'd been practicing on every morning. He hadn't touched it since seeing the video. Looking at it now just reminded him of how stupid he'd been, how naive. He'd thought Sophia was different. He'd opened his heart to her, shared things he'd never told anyone, worked harder at learning piano than he'd worked at anything in years. And the whole time, she'd been documenting him like a research subject, a case study in wealth and privilege. The worst part wasn't even the public humiliation. David had dealt with bad press before. The worst part was that he genuinely believed someone finally cared about him for who he was, not what he had. And he'd been wrong. Claire knocked softly on his door. "You have a visitor. She says it's important." "If it's Sophia, I told you I don't want to see her." "It's not Sophia. It's an older woman named Patricia Chen. She says she's Sophia's mother." David frowned. He'd never heard Sophia mention her family. Send her up. 5 minutes later, an elegant woman in her 60s entered his penthouse. She had Sophia's eyes and the same graceful way of moving. "Mr. Richardson, thank you for seeing me," Patricia said. "I know my daughter hurt you, and you have every right to be angry. But there are things you don't know. Things Sophia should have told you herself. David crossed his arms. I'm listening. My daughter isn't just a piano teacher. She's Sophia Chen, the concert pianist. She's performed at Carnegie Hall, won international competitions, toured the world. She comes from our family, the Chen Music Foundation. We're worth about as much as you are. David felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. What? She was working on that documentary about wealth inequality, yes. But she was doing it from a place of genuine concern, not malice. Sophia has spent her whole life in privileged circles, and she wanted to understand and expose the disconnect between people like us and everyone else. By lying to me, David said bitterly. Yes, and that was wrong. But David, I've known my daughter her whole life. I've never seen her as conflicted as she's been these past few weeks. She came to me 3 weeks ago and said she was falling for someone. She said you made her question everything she thought she knew about wealth and character. David sat down heavily. She has a strange way of showing it. She stopped the documentary. Did you know that? She called it off 2 weeks ago because she couldn't keep deceiving you. That video was leaked by her former partner without her permission. She's devastated. She still lied to me for weeks. She did, Patricia agreed, and she knows that was wrong. But ask yourself this. Would you have spent time with Sophia Chen, famous pianist from a wealthy family? Or did you need to meet her as just a woman teaching piano at a community center to see past your own defenses? The question hit David harder than he expected. He thought about that first night at the opera house. If Sophia had been there as herself, as someone from his world, would he have really changed? Or would she have been just another person he tried to impress with his money? I don't know, he admitted quietly. Patricia stood. My daughter is holding a press conference tomorrow. She's going to tell the real story, with your permission or without it. But I thought you deserved to know first. And I thought you deserved to know that her feelings for you are real, even if the circumstances that brought you together weren't. After Patricia left, David sat alone with his thoughts. He pulled out his phone and watched the viral video again. Really watched it. He saw himself as he'd been that night, arrogant, dismissive, treating Sophia like an object he could purchase. That joke about marrying her if she played for him, it was degrading even if he hadn't meant it that way. He'd changed since then. He knew he had. But watching this video, he understood why Sophia had wanted to document it in the first place. This was how he'd been. This was how people with his kind of money often were, and he'd never even noticed before meeting her. David opened his laptop and searched for Sophia Chen. Page after page of concert reviews, award ceremonies, sold-out performances. She was brilliant, famous, and had absolutely no need for his money or approval. Yet she'd spent hours teaching him basic piano, patiently correcting his mistakes, never once making him feel small for being a beginner. He found a video of one of her concerts. Watching her play on a grand stage, he recognized the same passion he'd seen that first night at the opera house, the same emotion that had drawn him to her in the first place. His phone rang. It was Claire. You need to see this, she said. Sophia just posted something online. David opened the link Claire sent. It was a statement from Sophia posted an hour ago. I need to address the video that's been circulating. Yes, I filmed David Richardson that night. Yes, I was working on a documentary about wealth inequality. But what the leaked footage doesn't show is what happened next. It doesn't show how David apologized for his behavior. It doesn't show how he spent weeks learning piano, not because he was good at it, but because he genuinely wanted to learn. It doesn't show how he donated to a community center without wanting recognition. It doesn't show how he learned the names of janitors and stayed late to hear children perform. Most importantly, it doesn't show how I fell in love with him while I was still lying to him about who I was. I was wrong to deceive him. I was wrong to film him without his permission. And I'm sorry. Tomorrow I'll be releasing the full footage showing the complete story, but only if David gives his consent, because unlike what I did before, I believe he deserves that choice. David, if you're reading this, I'm sorry. You deserved honesty from the beginning, and I hope someday you can forgive me. David read it 3 times. Then he looked at the piano, sitting silent in his living room. He walked over and sat down, his fingers finding the keys. He started playing the piece Sophia had been teaching him, the one he'd been too hurt to touch for days. His playing was still imperfect, still hesitant in places. But he played through to the end, and when he finished, he knew what he had to do. He picked up his phone and typed a message. Sophia, we need to talk. 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared. Then appeared again. Finally, a response came through. I'm at the community center, where we had our first lesson. I'll wait as long as it takes. David grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. He didn't know if he could forgive her completely. He didn't know if they could move past this. But he knew that what they'd had was real, even if it had started with lies. And he knew that people made mistakes, grew from them, and deserved second chances. After all, she'd given him one. The drive to the community center felt longer than usual. David's mind raced with everything he wanted to say, questions he needed answered, anger he still felt. But underneath it all was something else. Hope. When he walked into the community center, he found Sophia sitting at the same piano where they'd had their first lesson. She wasn't playing, just sitting there with her hands folded in her lap. When she heard him enter, she stood up quickly, her eyes red from crying. David, she said, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry. I know, David said. I read your statement, and I watched you. The real you. I looked up your concerts online. I should have told you from the beginning. I should have been honest about who I was and what I was doing. Yeah, you should have. David moved closer. But I also watched that video again. The one that leaked, and I saw who I really was that night. You were right to want to document it. I was terrible. You weren't terrible. You were thoughtless. There's a difference, is there? David sat down at the piano bench. I offered to buy you like you were something from a store. I made a joke about marrying you as if your talent existed just to entertain me. That's pretty terrible, Sophia. Sophia sat down beside him on the bench, careful to leave space between them. But then you changed. You genuinely changed. That's what the documentary should have been about, not just the worst moment. They sat in silence for a moment, both staring at the piano keys. I need to know something, David said finally. When did it become real for you? When did you stop seeing me as a documentary subject and start seeing me as just me? Sophia thought carefully. The 3rd lesson. You showed up early and helped Carlos without anyone asking. You didn't do it because I was watching or for good publicity. You did it because it was the right thing to do. That's when I realized I'd been wrong about you. And you kept filming after that? For another week, yes. Then I stopped. I told Trevor the project was over. I deleted my copies of everything except one file that I kept meaning to show you. To confess everything, but I was scared of losing you. So you lost me anyway when Trevor leaked it? Yes. Sophia's voice was barely a whisper, and I deserved that. David turned to look at her fully. You're Sophia Chen, famous pianist. You could have anyone. Why were you even interested in me? Because you're the first person in my world who wanted to earn something instead of just having it handed to you. Because you listened when I taught you. Because you cared about Carlos and those kids and the music. Not about impressing anyone. Because underneath that arrogance was someone genuine who was just lonely and didn't know how to connect with people. Sophia met his eyes. Because I saw who you could be, and then I watched you become that person. David felt his anger starting to dissolve, replaced by something more complicated. I don't know if I can trust you again. I know. And I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But David, I love you. Not the billionaire, not the documentary subject, just you. The man who practices piano every morning even though he's terrible at it. The man who remembers everyone's name. The man who's brave enough to change. David looked down at the piano keys. Then he started playing, slowly, carefully, the piece Sophia had taught him. She listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she had tears running down her face. You've been practicing, she said softly. Every day, even when I was angry at you. Especially then. David turned to her. I love you too, Sophia. That's why this hurt so much. Because it was real for me. It was real for me too. It is real. They sat there, neither quite ready to close the distance between them, but neither willing to walk away either. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows through the community center windows. Somewhere down the hall, children were practicing for their next recital. So what happens now? Sophia asked. David took a deep breath. Now we start over. With honesty this time. No cameras, no secrets, no lies. Just 2 people figuring out if what they have is worth fighting for. And is it? Worth fighting for? David finally closed the space between them, taking her hand. I think it might be. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a beginning. And sometimes that's all you need. 3 months passed, and trust was something they built slowly, piece by piece. Like learning a complicated piano composition one measure at a time, David and Sophia agreed to start completely fresh. No more lessons at first, just coffee dates where they talked about everything. Their childhoods, their fears, their dreams. Sophia told him about the pressure of growing up in a famous musical family, always expected to be perfect. David shared how his parents had died when he was young, leaving him a fortune but no guidance on how to be a decent human being with it. "I think that's why I became so arrogant," David admitted one afternoon as they walked through the park. "Money was the only thing I knew how to use to connect with people. I never learned how to just be myself. And I used my documentary as a shield," Sophia said. "I could judge everyone else's privilege without examining my own. Filming you made me feel like I was doing something meaningful, but really I was just avoiding my own hypocrisy." They were honest about the hard stuff too. David admitted there were still moments when he felt betrayed, when he'd remember that she'd filmed him without permission. Sophia didn't make excuses. She'd sit with his hurt, acknowledge it, and remind him that she was committed to earning back his trust however long it took. Slowly, carefully, they found their way back to each other. Sophia invited David to one of her concerts, the first time he'd see her perform as herself. He sat in the audience, surrounded by people who'd paid hundreds of dollars for tickets, and watched her command the stage with the same passion he'd seen that first night at the Opera House. When she played, the entire concert hall fell silent. Every note was perfect, but more than that, it was emotional, real. She played like she was sharing a piece of her soul with everyone there. After the concert, David went backstage. Sophia was still in her performance gown, talking with fans and critics. When she saw him, her face lit up in a way that made his heart skip. "What did you think?" she asked when they finally had a moment alone. "I think I'm in love with someone way out of my league," David said honestly. "I also think I finally understand why you were working at that gala. You wanted to remember what it felt like to be invisible, to be treated like everyone else." "Something like that," Sophia admitted. "In my world, everyone knows my name, my family, my accomplishments. Sometimes I wanted to just be a person, not a brand." "I get that now," David said, "more than I did before." They started spending more time at the community center together, not for lessons, but just to be around the music and the people. David started a scholarship program for kids who couldn't afford instruments or lessons. Sophia volunteered to teach advanced students. They worked side by side, and it felt right in a way nothing else ever had. Carlos, the janitor who'd watched their whole story unfold, pulled David aside one evening. "You know, I wasn't sure about you at first. Rich guy showing up, probably just wanting to feel good about himself. But you proved me wrong. You both did." "How so?" David asked. "You didn't just write a check and leave. You stayed. You learned people's names. You showed up even when it wasn't convenient. That's real character, not the fake kind." Those words meant more to David than any business deal he'd ever closed. One evening, 4 months after they'd reconciled, Sophia and David sat together at the community center piano. It was late and everyone else had gone home. Sophia had been teaching David a new piece, something more challenging than anything he'd attempted before. "I want to show you something," Sophia said quietly. She pulled out a USB drive from her bag. "This is all the footage I took, everything. I want you to see it, and then I want you to tell me what to do with it." They went back to David's penthouse and spent the next 3 hours watching. David saw himself through Sophia's camera, saw his transformation from arrogant to humble, from disconnected to engaged. He saw moments he didn't even remember, small kindnesses that Sophia had captured. He also saw footage of Sophia filming herself, her confessions to the camera about falling for him, her struggle with continuing the documentary, her decision to end it. When it finished, David sat back on the couch. "This is actually a good story. Not the one Trevor wanted to tell, but a real one about growth and change and second chances." "What should I do with it?" Sophia asked. "Tell the story," David said. "The whole story. Not to expose me or make yourself look good, but because it's true. Because maybe other people need to see that change is possible. That privilege doesn't have to mean being disconnected. That mistakes don't have to define us forever." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. But we do it together this time. Full transparency, both of our perspectives." They spent the next month working on the documentary together. adding context, interviews, reflections. They showed the bad and the good, the beginning and the growth. Sophia interviewed David about how it felt to see himself at his worst. David filmed Sophia talking about her own privilege and blind spots. When they released it, the response was completely different from the leaked video. People saw the nuance, the humanity, the real journey. It sparked conversations about wealth, character, and the possibility of change, but more importantly, it healed something between David and Sophia. Creating it together, being honest about all of it, that was the final piece of trust they needed to rebuild. 6 months after their reconciliation, the community center held its annual student recital. It was bigger than usual because of the new instruments and expanded program. Kids who'd never had access to music lessons were performing pieces they'd learned throughout the year. David was scheduled to perform too. He'd been practicing for months, working with Sophia on a piece she'd composed specifically for him. It wasn't technically difficult, but it was meaningful, full of emotion and story. Before the recital started, David pulled Sophia aside into the same room where they'd first met, where she'd been playing piano in her server's uniform and he'd made that terrible joke. "I need to tell you something," David said, and Sophia noticed he looked nervous. "What is it? Do you remember what I said to you that first night? That stupid, arrogant joke about marrying you if you played for me every day?" Sophia winced. "I remember. Not your best moment." "Definitely not," David agreed. "But I want to say something else now, something I actually mean. Sophia Chen, you've made me want to be a better person. Not better than other people, just better than I was. You've taught me that the things that matter can't be bought. They have to be earned. That real connection requires vulnerability and honesty. That change is possible if you're willing to do the work." He got down on one knee and Sophia's breath caught. "I'm not asking you to marry me because you play piano beautifully, though you do. I'm not asking because of your family name or your talent or any of that. I'm asking because I love who you are, your principles, your compassion, your willingness to call me out when I'm wrong. I'm asking because you make me want to deserve you every single day." He pulled out a ring, simple and elegant. "Will you marry me? Not because of some joke or transaction, but because we choose each other, cameras and all." Sophia was crying and laughing at the same time. "Yes, yes, absolutely yes. But on one condition." "Anything," David said. "You have to perform at our wedding. That piece I wrote for you. No backing out just because you're nervous." David laughed, standing up and pulling her into his arms. "Deal. Though I'm going to need a lot more practice. Good thing you're marrying a piano teacher." They kissed as piano music drifted in from the recital hall where children were warming up. It was the sound that had brought them together, that had challenged them both, that had ultimately helped them find something real. That evening, David performed his piece at the recital. His playing wasn't perfect. He stumbled once in the middle, had to pause and restart a measure. But he played with feeling, with genuine emotion, and when he finished, the entire community center erupted in applause. Sophia stood and clapped louder than anyone, pride shining in her eyes. Not pride in his technical skill, which was still beginner level, but pride in his courage, his growth, his willingness to be vulnerable in front of a crowd. After the recital, as they helped Carlos and the staff clean up, David overheard two kids talking. "That rich guy isn't so bad," one said. "He messed up his piece, but he kept going." "Yeah," the other replied. "My mom says he used to be really mean, but people can change if they want to." David smiled. Out of everything he'd accomplished in his life, being known as someone who could change, who could grow, that meant more than any business success or wealth ever had. That night, David and Sophia sat together at his piano, the one that used to be just decoration. They played a simple duet, their hands occasionally bumping, Sophia patiently correcting his timing, both of them laughing when he hit a wrong note. "You know what's funny?" David said. "That first night I joked about marrying you if you played for me every day. But now I get to marry you, and I'm the one who'll be playing for you every morning when I practice." "Life is full of surprises," Sophia said, resting her head on his shoulder. "Good surprises, though. The kind worth working for. The very best kind." They sat there as evening turned to night. Two people who'd started with lies and arrogance and hidden cameras, but who'd found their way to something true, something that couldn't be bought or faked or captured on film, something earned through patience, forgiveness, and the courage to change. Outside the window, the city lights twinkled like stars. Inside, the piano sat silent now, but tomorrow David would practice again. He'd practice every day, not because he had to, but because it reminded him of everything he'd learned about what really mattered. And sometimes, late at night, Sophia would play for him. Not because he'd asked or paid or joked about marriage, but because she wanted to. Because that's what you do when you love someone, when you choose them, when you build a life together one honest moment at a time. The end of their story wasn't perfect. They still had disagreements. David still occasionally fell back into old habits of throwing money at problems. Sophia still sometimes struggled with her own privilege, but they worked through it together with honesty and patience and love. And every day, in small ways and large, they proved that people could change, that second chances were worth taking, and that the best things in life were the ones you earned, not the ones you bought. The piano played on.